Hello, everyone. Welcome to the office hours for Fundraise with Confidence. Excited to talk to everyone here. The topic is how to fundraise as an introvert. And I think it's a really important topic for us to cover because one, a lot of builders do identify as introverts, people that don't necessarily derive energy from interacting with people. And the other thing that I tweeted about and mentioned was that I found that the daunting task of fundraising has turned a lot of very outgoing people into very quiet people. When you don't know a topic well, when you feel like you're in a position of weakness, when you're like asking for something as important and as crazy as potentially millions of dollars, can really make people feel very introverted. This is a topic that we're going to talk about, spend a lot of time in, and we have a really cool guest to talk about his experiences. Andy Bauch, co-founder and CEO of Morty, which we'll get to in a second. But a lot of times we do these topics with a very specific person because I think seeing a real person talk about things is important and helps you guys understand exactly what it means to actually execute on the things that I'll be talking about. So let me get back into this content a little bit, but I see a lot of familiar faces. Cynthia, good to see you again. Layla, I've seen some of these names. For the people that are joining for the first time, just wanted to give a quick background on myself, just so you know where I developed some of these frameworks and the approach. Essentially been in tech my whole career, but most relevantly, I was a venture capitalist at Graycroft, a multi-stage firm, generalist firm out of New York and LA for about 4 years before jumping into startups. My last startup I was co-founder and CEO was Tape, raised a couple $1 million from top investors, had a small exit in 2020, and then have spent the last year essentially transitioning over to this problem space, which is trying to make fundraising easier and more accessible for as many founders as possible. And I've done that as an internal coach for Silicon Valley Bank. And I do that through my overall company, Adamant Ventures, and the fellowship program that I run called Fundraise with Confidence. Okay. And then let me just make sure that everyone knows this. This is my encouragement for everyone who's joined a session to make sure that they ask more questions, that they question first principles, and that they don't just rely on blowhards or easy tweets that they read online about fundraising because of this. Essentially, I believe that in this game of startups and especially fundraising, on almost any given topic, worth giving advice around, including what to do if you're an introvert. I think you're liable to find two equally credible people that will give you 180-degree opposite pieces of advice. And this is a great example. Andrea Funston from Basecamp Ventures and Mark Suster from Upfront. They essentially have the exact opposite viewpoint on data rooms. So anyways, please think about asking questions, especially in these sessions and when you read things online. Okay, this is one of those shorter sessions, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but if you do have questions, make sure you send them through the chat and turn on your cameras if you can. We'd love to see your faces and react to you. And Andy's going to come on stage in a second and talk about things. So I know he wants to interact with you as well, even though he is an introvert. I'm going to have Andy talk a little bit more in a second, but let me describe his background. And he is the co-founder and CEO of Morty. It's a really exciting company, actually targeting probably a similar group of people, but experiential tracking for nerd culture experiences like escape rooms and VR and all those things. Really cool company. Just closed an amazing $1.3 million pre-seed round led by General Catalyst, one of the preeminent firms in the country. He's been a serial CTO, so he has been around a lot of fundraisers. He's been part of building big startups on the technical side of things. He has a master's in computer science from USC. So I'm trying to paint this picture, but I think the most telling thing to say, and this is when Andy will come on in just a second, is that aside from all the stuff that he does on the technology side of things, he is also one of the world's most famous and well-known Lego artists. So find him on Instagram. He's an influencer in the Lego art world, which I think might give you a picture of more of who he is. So Andy, would love for you to come off mute and say what's up. Let me stop share here. Andy, how are you?
Hello. Good.
Andy joining us from the middle of the night in an offsite in Europe. Is that right?
Yes, I'm in the Roman countryside with the team here. So this is my best Zoom view right now. Hopefully internet will work for you guys. We'll see.
Good to see you, man. Hopefully that was a decent enough introduction. I think the way I decided I wanted to do this was I'm going to talk to you a little bit about your experience, kind of early days thinking of raising money, and then just talk through your challenges and the ways that you actually thought about overcoming some of these things. And I actually never asked you, we've obviously hung out, we've spent time together. On the spectrum, you'd consider yourself an introvert?
Yeah, I would say I am naturally an introvert who has learned to be
Who has
extroverted
learned? Very
over
good.
time, right?
And
Yeah.
I think that's a very accurate way to describe that, especially if, given how successful you've been fundraising. Before we get into that, so I'm going to go back and just show a couple of slides. I'll say a few words about them, and I'm hoping that it stimulates thoughts on your end too as you tell your story. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let me screen share again. Here are two concepts that I talk to people a lot when it comes to fundraising, and it is, I think, relevant to the mindset of an introvert. So this is for everyone. There is this really challenging chicken and egg problem that I believe exists within fundraising, no matter who you are. And it's this idea that coming to the table with investors with a sense, a calm confidence is how I describe it. Confidence is one of those things that really drives investor interest. But at the same time, it's difficult to be confident, be calm and confident until you get the investor interest. And when you get investor interest, and then it calms you down, and then you can go out and then have more investors interested in you. But it's 100% a chicken and egg challenge, and something that I think people need to understand at a deep. This is something else that I describe to you when it comes to telling a story, telling a little bit about yourself. I think a lot of times people, like, your story is made up of a ton of different things, a lot of details between you and the company, et cetera. But I think there are a couple of things that sometimes are really interesting when it comes to the founder story and the pitch story, which is highlighting struggles and successes, highlighting certain things that introverts don't love talking about, whether it is times that they've failed or reasons and components of their success. So both bragging, like a little bit of bragging and a little bit of being vulnerable. I think it's really hard as an introvert. So two quick concepts that I just wanted to stoke the sort of memory flames from you, Andy, before chatting. And you don't need to react to any of those two things. But what I wanted to just ask you is, talk to me a little bit about your time before Morty, maybe 2 seconds on your exposure to fundraising. I said you were involved in companies, but not really fundraising. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about how you just started engaging in fundraising and what that felt like early days.
Yeah, sounds good. So I was CTO of 4 different early stage startups before Morty. I was in the room at a couple of those companies with the CEO when we were raising. I was surprised as the CTO that none of the investors gave a shit about our technology. So I basically didn't have to answer any questions, right? I was like, oh, I'm going to be grilled. This is going to be hard. It was not, nobody ever cared. At the stage we were at, and probably every stage, investors, even the technical ones, didn't have questions for the CTO. So it's basically just there and observing. I was helping sometimes put together pitch materials at a very distant level, but not the one responsible for the raise, for the deck, for any of those things. So that's where I was. And then,
yes, so you had exposure to it and seeing it from arm's length, learning about some of the details. Now, and the other thing that I'd point out is the fact that you were part of 4 startups that scaled relatively large means that you actually knew some people. So I wouldn't even put you in the bucket of what the last office hours was, which was like fundraising without a network. Like, you knew people involved in startups, which is way more than other people. Yeah, you knew some
That's
people.
Right. Yeah, I'd worked in technology for 15 years. I'd been in startups in LA for 10 years. I'm not a master networker, but I'd accidentally acquired some connections.
Yeah. I think that's a fair way to describe it. But I think maybe what you found was when you're put in the driver's seat, all of a sudden, like, it's on you to do a lot of different things, including activate that network. So I wonder if you could just chat a little bit about early days. You're thinking about fundraising. What did that feel like? And if there are specific elements that you remember of the introverted side of you finding challenges, maybe just speak to those so the people in the room relate.
Yeah, for sure. So in the early days, there were a few things that I am not great at as an introvert, and that I've realized throughout the process. And at the beginning, I was just nervous because it was my first real pitch call. So my first probably like 10 calls, I was like decently nervous. That wore off fairly quickly, but I still felt like I was standing on shaky ground. Like I really did not have my feet under me. It's just like, okay, like where I'm like, and I think that's part of the fundraising process, honestly, is trying to find that. And some people are much better at that than others and faster. I was slow. It took me a while, but I would say that like I have like considered myself allergic to sales. It's like a phrase I've used, and I probably shouldn't. Like I don't use it. I said I don't like. I have to do sales now. I'm a CEO. I have to sell to investors. I have to sell to customers. But I think that's the mental mindset I had myself as the chief technology officer, as the tech person. Is like the sales team, the bullshitter, the like big vision person. This is like a bunch of Silicon Valley, like the TV show kind of bullshit, like changing the world one bird ride at a time, is like the kind of stuff that I make fun of. And so I found it hard to embrace parts of that. And that like even now is one that I'm still getting better at. So I was not great at that. Not great, like you said, at pitching myself, telling succinctly my story. Still, I'm just okay at that. I wouldn't say I'm great. If my fiance, who's a total extrovert, pitches me or my company, it still sounds so much better. And it's really sad. It still sounds so much better. Not great at speaking to groups. That's another thing. Like I'm not really a public presenter type persona. Don't love that. I've limited social stamina, I would say. So many calls back to back. There are like a handful of different things. And so like my first few calls, I was a little nervous. I was talking really quickly. Okay. Like just really fast, like maximum speed, because that in my mind is like equates with smart and impressive. I was standing on my first handful of calls because I felt like I think better on my feet. And I was like, I'll be less nervous if I can think better, if I can think faster. I'm trying to navigate. I don't even know the terminology in fundraising. I don't know what these words mean. Don't know what I'm supposed to say. I don't know when I've fallen into a trap, and there are many of them. And I wasn't friendly. I was like, I just wasn't smiling. I wasn't friendly. I sounded, lots of bad stuff.
No, I appreciate the open honesty, the vulnerability to share with the group. It is really helpful to hear people describe mistakes that they made or the challenges that they have. And then also seeing that the fact that you're able to overcome those things. So I think very helpful for the whole group. There are a couple of things that I pause you there and talk about the things that can help people and I know have helped you going through these things. So first one is, as an introvert, as honestly, and how I opened this session is that whether you're outgoing and extrovert or introverted, this challenging task of fundraising has an ability to make the most outgoing person freeze up. And so this experience that you had with pitching, where you get nervous and you're unsure about these things, and then you found your footing, the first thing I'd say is, and I wonder if you wish you had done this more, but like practicing it, I feel like you took your early pitches and they ended up being your practice sessions and you got better. But for everyone out there, I don't care how good you are, you will not be good your first time. And if you are introverted, you probably will not improve as quickly as somebody who likes speaking on their feet, who likes speaking to people. And so I'd highly recommend you figure out ways to practice pitching. If you can find people that can simulate what a pitch would feel like or sound like, even better. But honestly, just talking through your story on camera, recording yourself in a mirror, all with your fiance, all these things are very helpful. And Andy, I don't know how much practice you did before, but do you feel like that is something that you would look back on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say I didn't practice really at all before. I threw together a deck, I'd run it by people. I had done like my pitch. Okay, I practiced a little bit with some like founder friends, with some buddies who worked in it. They gave me advice. It was mostly positive, right? Like probably shouldn't have been, but yeah, it was mostly positive, and I might have just been different on those calls too. I've learned that if you practice pitching to somebody, if you practice your pitch as though you're going to a pitch competition, let me give you my pitch. That is nothing like what investor conversations are like, which are conversations, not just a straight pitch.
Yep.
So like practicing the pitching was useless to me. The most valuable feedback I got, right? Like a lot of the advice I give to other founders right now is just Jason's words filtered through my brain and my experience. So like your advice was amazing, but like in terms of reflecting what was happening and practicing, yeah, in my case, it was from my fiance, who is definitely an extrovert. She also has a performance background, and she like studied acting in London. And in my case, she would like, I'm just in my loft right above our bedroom, and so she would just hear me on like half my pitches, and she like sometimes would, and she would just give me feedback, and sometimes it was hard and it hurt, and other times I was like slightly getting better. I was never going to be as good as her, but she would, yeah, be like, you sound like your vocal frying today. You're just like talking like this. And you sound depressed. You sound sad. You sound whatever. And that was helpful. I would say I wish that I had recorded myself more at the beginning, record myself and rewatch it until I found one that like I think is actually I did a decent job, and then send it to someone like with her background, ideally, and send it to people in the investing community, people that are former investors, and get the hard feedback. Like, what could I do better there?
Yeah. And then there are two things that I point out is this is about pitching in general, pitching, but also in like your narrative development in general. The other thing you probably experienced is that founders are too close to their businesses to really be able to say, even listening to your own pitch, you're saying like the way you deliver a pitch versus a conversational like interaction with an investor, you really need people to interact with you and say that didn't make any sense to me. Like you're going, I don't understand what you're saying, because no matter how many times you've done this before, no matter how many successful fundraisers you've been through, you will always be too close to your company to be able to give the best sort of feedback to yourself about, was this understandable, really quickly. The other thing that I would say, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, like so I saw a tweet or something about like how you're like, it's your job as a CEO to like lead the investor up the mountain, right? Like you have to see what they are and aren't resonating with, and it's entirely a conversation, like reacting and trying to gently give them the right thing at the right time to push them along. And people that I know that have won a lot of pitch competitions, right? Crushed 4 pitch competitions. I got 70 grand from my company. Like it doesn't translate to actually pitching to an investor necessarily. Maybe it does, but not always.
I think that's a good call out. The other thing I want to make sure that I highlight is you were talking about fundraising being sales and selling, even salespeople for your company being sales, and that being something you were allergic to. And I wanted to point out an insight that I had around sales myself, which has helped me really understand what sales can be and what pitching can be. I always used to think, and by the way, just to make sure everyone knows, we're going to go till quarter after. So we're going to leave some time for a Q&A in case people do have that. But this is important because I used to think like good salespeople were people that could sell ice to Eskimos. You've heard that term before, selling ice to Eskimos. And it's this concept of Andy, the Eskimo, has no need for ice because he lives in the North Pole or wherever, but a great salesperson could sell ice to Eskimos. And I think that's just not the right way to think about sales. When you think about sales, whether it's your product to a customer or your company to the investor, the best salespeople in the world will have the utmost confidence in the product that they're selling. And so what they actually believe is that whatever they have is a great fit for the person that they're talking to. And it's their job to help them understand that. And if you can get to that mindset and then also have the confidence in yourself and your product, then when you start thinking about pitching, hopefully what washes away from you is like this, oh my God, I need to trick the investor into believing that my company is amazing and then they will give me money. That is when you're going to get really nervous. And I've had some of those feelings in the past before, and I've seen founders do that. They're like, I know that I have this like deficiency, so I need to cover that up, but then really try to say that it's not what it is. That's not going to work. Maybe you'll have a great like single track way of pitching that. But the moment you get into a conversational story or like an interaction with an investor, there will be variations and divergences that won't allow you to keep that up. What actually works is Andy, like thinking about the universe of underrepresented and nerd culture participants that don't have the experience that they need, and really believing like that market is gigantic, and like really truly believing that, so that when he goes to pitch an investor, he can say, look, I know what we are, and I know why it's a problem, and I know why we can be a solution. And if someone says, you're not doing this yet, you're not doing this yet, he can be like, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not doing those couple of things, but what I do know is X, Y, and Z, and be very confident in what he pitches. Andy, I wonder if our interactions help you think through that, and if you saw any of that in the way the reception of Morty went from beginning to closer to when you were closing everything.
Definitely. Yeah. So some of the stuff that I improved upon, almost all of which I think came out of our conversations. I sat down. I think I did that before we started talking, but like I was standing, right? I thought that was a crutch. It was making me look unstable and crazy. And I got that from seeing through Natasha's. That's what I was like. And that was different. I learned over time, don't try to impress the investor by being, I was like intentionally being like brusque, like being too cool. I think I read a book, Pitch Anything by Oren, somebody or other, which a lot of people recommended, and it was some of the worst advice I got overall. And yeah, like I thought that this was the way. It was like, I'm too busy for this. It's not, right? Even if you have no time, like you're on the phone. When I realized, yeah, I should start the calls, like I should look up a couple facts about the investor first, have something to talk about, where they're from, where they went to school, who we have in connection on LinkedIn. I would write down those 3 things. It would take me 60 seconds. And then I would begin the call and I would try to be joking or like making some kind of connection. If they don't have a sense of humor, that's fine, right? Yes, I would try to be charming, right? Not be arrogant.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I
Like
brought this up,
nice, like
because you're touching some of this.
precisely. Yeah. So like turning out, you have to get the investor to like you, especially at the early stage. I came out of this whole thing thinking like the most important thing is that the investor likes you in terms of you as a founder. More important than what you're like, unless your prior experience is starting a huge unicorn company. That's the next thing, is like they gotta like you. They invest in people they like.
Yeah,
And yeah.
it's a really good call out, and I think it's a variation of another piece of advice I give people, which is, especially at the earliest stages, and I think a lot of the people on this call are at the earliest stages, but even honestly, Series A, Series B, Series C, to me, your business is just a reflection of the founder. Like it's a characteristic of the founder. And it's something that they happen to be doing right now. And anything you tell me is likely going to be very different when you're a huge company. And so, yes, your business is interesting, but it's just, oh, this is the way Andy thinks about the world, that like it's manifesting itself in Morty. And everything about our conversation is, do I like Andy? Do I like the way he thinks? Do I think he's going to be able to lead and attract people? And I definitely think founders don't get that right away, and they rush into trying to be like smart and go detailed in their business and show like financial projections that are just completely made up anyways. Let's look at some of these quotes really quickly, because these are actually questions that some of the participants sent through, and you touched on a little bit of them, but I think the first one is worth thinking about, because you even said that you did one part of it on purpose. Like you were trying to be brusque and arrogant, but in your experience, those first 2 quotes, balancing arrogance, confidence with warmth, or being charming and appealing to investors, anything come to mind in terms of how you've been able to adjust yourself?
Yeah. So my story is going to be different than other people, right?
Mhm.
Like my weaknesses as a founder will be different, I would say. So take this all with a grain of salt. In my case, I think it's probably like easier for me to come off as arrogant than warm, not because I am, but just because I'm a white guy, right? Like I have been the CTO of a bunch of companies. I'm like probably on the older side of some founders, right? I'm like 38, and I didn't need to push that button any harder. I just needed to turn the charm button on. What did I do to do that? Some of it was just getting comfortable with conversations and being like, okay, like I can do this. Yeah. Some of it was just that, honestly, just like getting some reps in. Some
Yeah.
of it was intentionally putting myself in a brain space. Like sometimes I would listen to, I think the one podcast that like I've listened to every episode. Jason, I'm working my way through yours, don't be mad. Is Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. Like Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, for me, it just cracks me up every time. So I could listen to that or whatever that thing is, get me into a pleasant mindset before the
Yeah.
call. And then just remember like the beginning of the call, the first like 5-10 minutes is just you talking to them about whatever. And trying to get to know them a little bit, ask them a few questions about themselves. You're
Yes.
meeting this person for the first time, even if it's over Zoom. You're having coffee. So especially if you're not American, you can talking to American investors. You have to learn the art of like weather-related conversation, right? Like a little bit of that bullshit that we have to do in the US.
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts of the pitch module, the live pitch module, and the fellowship is making people realize that the first 5 minutes are really important, not to start talking about your company. And I think first-time founders feel like a lot of imposter syndrome and feel like they need to show that they belong. So they're like, they rush past it. And they don't want to talk about, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't want to like engage with them. I need to show them that I've actually done some work and show them what my company is and show them that it's impressive. Whereas a lot can be won and lost in that first 5 minutes of trying to make a real connection with the investor. And then the last thing, maybe, what has networking and been like for you? We already talked about that you had accidentally established a baseline network, but I think you've realized that it needs to go beyond that, and people need to start like connecting you more people. Any quick thoughts on networking as an introvert?
Yeah, going into it, there was really one former founder buddy of mine who was like, I'm down, like to help you. You should do this. Like, I'm here for whatever. He was super supportive. Other than that, there was not really anybody else that was just like a close enough person. I felt like I could just tap them and ask questions of. And so, yeah, over that first year, I really spent a lot of time acquiring those like other founders. Not that I have a panel of them that I call, but just reaching out on LinkedIn. I meet them through whatever. I remember, oh, this person founded that company back in the day. This person maybe angel invests now. I'll ask them for advice. Advice that I got from other founders who'd been through it before was among the most helpful. Almost every founder is down to help another founder. Like we really understand kind of like the darkest moments and where that's at. And so that was a lot of the encouragement that I got to definitely connect with other founders.
Cool. That's super helpful. So with just the last 5 to 10 minutes, and we don't have to take this if people don't have questions. Last time, surprisingly, didn't get that many questions, but if anyone on the call has specific questions for Andy or myself around anything that's going around fundraising or the course, this is supposed to be open office hours to ask about any of those things, details about the program, things that you're going through as a fundraiser right now, please feel free to ask. And we will hang out here for a second and awkwardly stare at each other. Andy, what's the best thing that you've eaten in Italy so far?
God, man, it's only been here for a week, but like, it's hard to say. It's been just like so much good pizza so far. It's probably the best. It's amazing the difference in quality.
All right. I don't need to hold up everyone. This was an amazing conversation. Honestly, you touched on kind of everything that I wanted to hear from you, Andy.
Did Ricardo have a question? I just saw him come off mute.
I did not see it. Let's see. Ricardo? No, maybe not.
Okay.
Okay. The last thing I'll say is
hi, Jason.
Oh, yes. Who is talking? Shubham?
Yeah, Shubham.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Jason. That was a really nice session. I'm from India.
Great.
And happened to see this, thought to attend this. So I have a question regarding fundraising. So currently I'm working in a cryptocurrency startup. So we are going to launch our blockchain product. Now, the challenge I see here is that there are many VC aligned companies for crypto startups, but most of them are US based. And now I'm sitting in India and I do not have a single connection with them, straight connection with them. So what I want to understand is, do cold emails really work, or do we really need to have someone who can introduce us to those VC funds?
That's a good question. It comes up a lot. We talked a little bit about this in the last session. So I believe that cold outreach does work. And I think it's a component of every fundraise, but it should be like 5%. 5 to 10% of your outreach. And usually what happens is I encourage people to have their target list of investors and then do everything they can to start networking their way into some sort of introduction. And the easiest way, if you're an entrepreneur in India and you're trying to get to the US based investors, the easiest connection is leveraging something Andy said, which is that You might not think that you have a connection to the investor, but it turns out you have a mutual interest set or an overlap with some people that do know them, being the founders in their portfolio. So if you see founders in their portfolio that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm working on this company, lead with making sure that you think that there's a way that you can be helpful, that you want to provide value as well. You might be surprised at how many founders will get an email like that and be like, you know what, I'd spend 30 minutes chatting with you. And then after that conversation, if you can create a good connection there, then you can say, I was really like interested in talking to Nico over at General Catalyst. No pressure, but if that's an easy connection, or at least sending my materials over, I'd really appreciate it. That amount of work, there is a decent amount of work there, but I would highly recommend you put that effort in before you put effort into 100% of cold outreach.
Yeah, to echo that, I had over 300 investor conversations in like the last year or so. None of my cold outreach efforts resulted in a check. They were almost entirely useless in my case, I found. And yeah, like getting the warm intro through other founders is not that bad. It's like, hey, like thinking of raising, considering raising from this fund. Sal, you're on their cap table, would love to chat for 10 minutes if you have time sometime. And then, yeah, once you're on the call, they might interpret that as you already have a term sheet from them, but you don't have to say one way or the other. Just get on the call, ask them some questions. And then at the end, yeah, if an intro is easy, we'd love that.
Yeah, that's great. Andy, there's a question from June. June, do you mind coming off mute and maybe asking it live? I think it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not in a state where I can turn on my camera.
No worries. Yeah, you want to just articulate what you said?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys highlighted something really important, right? Like that these conversations are less like presentation, like linear conversations, but it's a really two-way conversations where they want to hear how you think and all of that. And in that, you guys mentioned you truly believing in what you're doing, and that coming across the table is really important, which makes a ton of sense. So I was just wondering, as you navigate these conversations, I'm sure not every conversation goes the way you plan. I'm sure you have some very disappointing, challenging conversations. And I was just wondering, was there a thing that you did or anything you practiced or any tricks you learned along the way in sort of managing your mental state as you went through that? Was a question I wanted to pose.
Mm-hmm. That was tough, honestly, like having so 2 parts. I can talk about managing mental state, and I can
He's like, no, it's going to be really hard, June. Sorry.
No, talk about managing mental. I could also talk about, having confidence in the pitch, having other founders that you can talk to from time to time. And I think once you start connecting with us, that like a lot of on the call, if there's anything, if you got any questions, like they'll truly mean it. Let me know, hit me up. I'm down to chat, right? Like text me, whatever. So chatting with other founders from time to time about how things are going, I think is really helpful. In my case, reminding myself that like I was attempting to do my dream, like something I've dreamed of for many years, and try to step back every so often. It's hard when you're in it, but trying to step back and give perspective once in a while. And look, like you're choosing to do this. You have the opportunity based on like saving enough over the years to take some time to do this, right? If it doesn't work, that is not the end of the world. You can get another job, right? This is not like give you some perspective, and will just make you better at pitching, because like Jason said, right? Like the more confidence you have, the more calm you are, the better an investment it seems like you are, the more it seems like the VC is catching a deal, in Jason's words, and less like you are hunting them. They never want to feel hunted. They want to feel like, oh, wow, here's like an amazing thing that came across my plate, or like I sniffed out. In terms of how to have the true confidence in your business, I would say for me, like it didn't come down to just like mindlessly, look, this is the future, believe it or get out. My main problem is as a founder, and this will be different people, like for me, no investor had trouble believing that I could build a good product, because I've led product teams as a CTO for 10 years. Other founders, that will be one of the main things they push on. For me, it wasn't that. But for me, it was like, how do you know about this space? How do you know about experiential entertainment? Anything about this stuff, about like how nerds are hanging out or what geeks are doing or any of that stuff. And one of the first things Jason and I worked on when we were working together was specifically just connecting myself to the story in a way that was believable. I was totally failing because they were just like, I don't know if this market's that big. I don't know if there is something interesting or new here. Like, they wanted to be convinced and they weren't convinced. And once I got it down to, actually, we ended up using like the Lego artist side, but here's my background as a geek, here's my geek cred, right? Like, here's how I know about a new type of entertainment that a lot of people are doing. Investors got like, oh, okay, like, I'm not going to challenge the world's foremost Lego artist as far as they know. I guess they don't know any. So pick that thing. Like, for me, it was like, pick the thing that nobody can best me at. No investor can say they know more about this. And then subtly tie everything on that foundation that I built to the point where it's, okay, that all seems credible because I'm nodding along. So that was like starting conversations that way got me a lot more confidence. And then I could talk. I'm still getting better at talking about the vision, right? The big vision, that kind of thing. But like building on that made it a lot better too. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
June, I'll also give you a couple sort of spins on that and things that you should think through. So like, I run a fellowship program, but it's meant to be a shortcut to things that other people have done. So, and part of being part of a program is like essentially creating a mastermind, a group of entrepreneurs that are going through the same struggle that you can talk to. So what Andy was talking about is like super valuable, and having 5 or so founders that you pull together to be in your Rolodex that like can talk about the things that you're going through is so valuable. And I think one of the things I try to get people to overcome is this idea, like, you shouldn't be trying to problem solve on your own. You shouldn't be trying to overpower all this. And just because you've been so smart throughout your career and you've, gone through good schools and gotten great jobs all on your own, that one, you shouldn't have been doing that back then like I was. But 2, it's really hard to go through the whole startup journey of fundraising and beyond on your own. And you should be trying to short circuit this. You should be trying to find people to support you. So definitely start working on that yesterday, June. See if there are other founders at a similar stage or people that are maybe 1 or 2 steps in front of you that would be willing to just be in that group. That'll be incredibly helpful for moderating and managing your mental state. And then the confidence thing in your business is something that I run people through at the very beginning too, because I would say this is a finger in there oversimplification, but I would say over 50% of founders who are creating startups probably doing it for the wrong reasons, in my estimation. And especially because it's been so sexy to be a startup founder in the last 5 years. And if you are in that state and you like, it can be and I'll even put myself in that bucket. The last company I started, I did not start for the right reasons. And because of it, wasn't able to drive it to an incredible outcome. But I was a great fundraiser. So I'm going to get any company funded. But people that aren't professional fundraisers, you have to really believe in what you're doing, because that's the only way you're going to get to a conversation with an investor who asks you a bunch of different questions. And it shouldn't matter. Like, you shouldn't have to bob and weave and make stuff up. It should all be grounded in why you're excited about what you're doing and the thing that you're going to build. And you might not know all the answers, but you do know the answer of why you're doing this. And if you can get yourself there in that comfort level, then the shitty times will feel shitty, but like exactly what Andy said, like he has it. This has been a dream of mine. And I found the space that I knew I could build a big business on my own. And so I should be very grateful that I even have the opportunity to have some asshole VC make fun of my business. So anyways, that'd be the longer answer there.
A lot of hard conversations at the beginning, a lot of like those first handful of rejections, that stuff does just get easier, but the rejections at each stage remain hard or get harder. So when I had a term sheet from one fund and it was about to, right, and it totally fell through and I had 0 other options.
I forgot about that.
Worse than any of the other like rejections early on from any one investor. But like now I can get rejected by an investor and I give 0 shits. And so it's just like having now a list of investors that I know I can reach back out to, and having built the network. And that took a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of connecting through founders and other people. And some is just having had the experience and knowing it's really not a big deal and you're not going to fit with every investor. And there's a ton of money out there at this point from different places that was waiting to be deployed. And yeah.
Appreciate the answers, guys.
Great. Look, I think we went 5 minutes over time, and unless anyone has a burning question, really appreciate everyone joining and engaging with Andy. Andy, I think I've told you this in person a couple of times, but really proud of everything you were able to do, man. And yeah, I forgot about that blip where, I mean, that, what a shitty time that was. He essentially had the term sheet in hand and then it was gone. And then it was like, what do you do next? So it's all possible, even as an introvert, even as someone who like this doesn't come naturally to, who it definitely did not for Andy. So I encourage everyone to keep working at this. It's a solvable problem. That's what I believe. It is a solvable problem. Good luck, everyone. You can find me at JAYEH on a lot of different platforms, and hope to engage with you guys and keep helping in the future. Andy, we'll talk soon.
And feel free to ping me, folks, if I can help.
Yeah, Andy Bauch like couch. That's Andy Bauch. And I would also, is it just Andy Bauch on Instagram too, right? Oops.
Yeah, on all the platforms, just my name.
Yeah, I'd give him a follow on Instagram too, which is his art. It's very cool.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a good night, Andy. I know it's late over there, but we'll catch up stateside soon. Okay.
I love that. Thanks for having me.
Take it easy.